Let's discuss this story and other pressing issues around the ban on Russian oil imports with international affairs analyst Gbenga Onifade. He joins me from the UK via Zoom. Good to have you join us. This is more like a compromise deal, isn't it? Because it took quite a while to get everyone on the same page, especially Hungary. How effective is this?
Well, you have to understand that the EU is made of different member states, and they need a majority to be able to pass on a vote. Hungary, which heavily relies on Russia, I mean, obviously being former part of the Soviet Union, likewise the Czech Republic, Croatia, and a few other countries, they have to oppose this ban because, number one, Europe is already on, facing existential threats in terms of the rising cost of living with inflation in Germany, for example, which is Europe's leading economy, at an all-time high of about 8.9%. The UK and a few other countries like that, everyone is facing, record high inflation. So everybody's got to put their citizen first, number one. Number two, who's going to pay for it? If you place this ban on Russia's Russian oil, who's going to face this ban? Because the governments are already stretched; they cannot afford to further discount the economies. That's number two. Number three, especially Hungary, who is posing as a staunch opponent to this ban. They like I said, they heavily depend on oil, and their ports needs to be retooled. Their whole site needs retooling because it's been tooled to 100% focus on Russia, and at the same time they need to they need some funding from the EU, some cash funding, which, like I said, the EU is already stretched. They probably, I'm thinking, I'd like to be a fly on the wall. They're probably telling them, we will not fund you. You've got to be able to fund it yourselves. And Hungary must say, you know what, we cannot afford it. Therefore, we will vote a no. So there must have been a compromise internally between them, and therefore, for them to be able to get to this stage. And again, this is just still being talked. They're talking about phasing out 75% on the short term, and on the net term, towards the end of the year, phasing out 90% by the end of the year. So yes, I think they're getting somewhere. Again, it's all about, like your uncle said, trying to stop this war machine, because when there's no money, then war cannot be funded.
And that's why I want to get to the war machine. Whilst this is the toughest sanctions on Russia yet since the invasion of Ukraine, there is still no talk about sanctions on Russian gas. So how much of financing does this really cut to the Russian war machine and then the country's budget as well?
Well, Russia gets paid in dollars, about $850 million daily in oil payments, which is going to Europe. And Europe as a whole relies on about 40% of their oil comes all the way from Russia. There are other countries which could be lined up, hence why this talk is taking some time. So what you've got to do is, they talk about how do you eat an elephant. You take things in chunks, in near-sized chunks. And again, this is heavily affecting Russia. A few of their organizations is crumbling. Western organizations, huge organizations, corporations are pulling out of Russia. So how far does it go? I suppose you don't want to lift, sanction the whole lot, in one go. So EU's actually, with EU trying to use the oil as a tool, they're telling you, or telling Vladimir Putin, that listen, we still have more tools on the arsenal. Again, they've cut off the SWIFT payment, from a certain corporations. So it's all about piecemeal approach, trying to take it bit by bit. And eventually, if you realize, of course, that EU heavily depend on oil and gas, and especially because it's usually very cold, thankfully we do get a 3-month summer, and then once after that it's autumn, and then going back to winter. So end of the year is crucial. EU need time to find alternatives, and while they're delaying this is giving Russia enough time to seek or source alternatives as well. So I believe evidently this should pose a good time for Russia to, again, on Russian side, to be able to find an alternative. But we're talking oil. It does take time. It's not that easy, and there will be loopholes. And again, in the near time, it's favoring Russia because they can sell at a higher price this oil. So it favors Russia in the near time, but in the long time, it will already, it's the economy is already being affected and already affected, crumbling economy. In the long term, they will struggle.
And you touched on a very interesting point, the fact that Russia is going to take advantage of this. We've not heard from President Putin. He's likely to call Europe's bluff. But how easy would it be for Russia to find new markets and then reorient its oil exports?
Okay, so it's not that easy to find people who will be buying in bulk, because you've got some partners that you rely heavily on and you've been managing with over time. Now, where would Russia want to go? Again, they would have to go to the people who are not very much allied with Europe and America, and that would be very, very tough. Probably they could go to China. They could go to some countries who are playing the both games with that both friendly games. Friendship games with the EU and the US allies, but it will not be easy. Number one. Number two, so Asia is going to be the key focus. That's the most important thing. But on the other hand, they would have to be ready to sell it very, very cheap, and that's not very good for them. Again, due to this whole embargo and the loophole it provides, there's this heavy reliance on the dollar. If the allies in America decide them not to use the dollar, that again makes it cheaper than the price they currently sell. Not good for Russia on the first hand. Number two, they would have to spend on, yes, number one, there will be supply chain issues. Number two, there will be retooling to make sure their site, is available, can take Russian Russian oil. So there's a lot more to this process, because when you're talking about facilities made ready, made available, these guys have to make. So it's going to cost both sides, the Russia and the new partner. It's going to cost both of them in finding suitable, residents for the new oil. And Russia would have to be ready to take lesser payments. Again, going back home to Moscow, the residents in Moscow are already under pressure. I think, and I believe, once things start bubbling out, people start, getting on the streets. Gradually, people are already started coming out. They've been voicing out gradually. But the more the voices start raising up, then of course the war will be quelled.
And one wonders about the voices in Europe as well. This has to be some burden on Europeans in terms of a few prices. We've seen that few prices have gone up in recent times. And what does that mean for Europeans as well? And then sourcing for finding new sources of oil exports. So
for Europe, the oil comes from different places. We do get, I think Nigeria supplies about 7% of Russian oil, of the European oil. Kazakhstan, they do supply about 8%, fairly equal. You've got Iraq, you've got Saudi Arabia, and you've got America. America has been touting their way, even though America is more of a preservationist. They tend to preserve their oil rather than buy. And Norway. So it's going to give more routes to other areas, to probably increase their supplies. They're waiting. It's not going to be easy. We've got a country like Nigeria, which already has pressure from internal pressure, and especially facing security. If they're going to have to ramp up. If they would have to ramp up the supplies, that will be a bit of a torture, because again, like we said, like we both know, the people are thinking about this oil remittances, and they're not benefiting from it. So there will be a bit of a pressure there. So Europe will be looking at soft landings in peaceful areas, Kazakhstan, which is nearby, Norway. And of course, one of the things that's been heavily debated is fracking. Fracking is not very useful for the environment. It poses a danger. But people are thinking, do you know what? Instead of people dying or the environment, we've got to weigh our options, and we've got to go the full length of, let's just get to this point right now and get the job done before we start looking for other alternatives. So that they've got a few options on their hands, but they would have to play this out, and that's why things are taking time. But at the same time, expenses are going up. Who's going to pay for it? Europeans don't actually want war, but at the same time, nobody is ready to keep dipping their hands in their pockets in order to pay a lot more. So I'll leave that to
absolutely. And I guess we can say that it is interesting days ahead to see how this plays out for Europe and how it plays out for Russia. Thank you so much for talking to us, as always. International Affairs Analyst Gbenga Onifade.
Thank you.